at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And Mike, would you like to introduce yourself while I set up my screen share here?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Mike McCauley is my name. I'm design director at Champions Design. I've been with the agency for around 6 years, and I started as an intern. So my time spent working with Bobby and Jennifer in the various teams that have been present over the years have kind of brought me to this point, and what myself and Karina do in our day to day. We'll kind of go through now. One of the things we've been doing recently also is some teaching at the School of Visual Arts in the MFA in Branding program there. So thanks for joining us, everybody, and Karina can take it away.
Great. So I'll start off telling you a bit about our team and about our process and the work that we do, and I'll volley it back to Mike at the end to walk through a few case studies of work that he'll share with you. We're Champions Design. We were founded by Jennifer Kynan and Bobby Martin here, who met as students at the SVA MFA design program and spent time working at other agencies and in-house before ultimately founding Champions Design in 2010, starting with a big project of rebranding the Girl Scouts of the USA. The team also includes Michael here, who you met, our project manager, Haley, and our designer, Taylor. So we're 6 people on our team. We're small and nimble, and we are based in, our offices are based in the East Village in Manhattan, which you can see virtually in our backgrounds behind us since we can't be there today. In 2019, Fast Company named Champions Design one of the 30 most important companies in design. And what we do is we really specialize in visual identity system design with brands. Here's like a really quick sampling of a lot of work that we've done over the last 10 years. And we like to say that we're industry agnostic. So we're not focused on any particular industry, but work with brands across the board, from cultural institutions, sports and entertainment, education, and so forth. And for all of these types of projects, we kind of run through the same 4-step process, which begins here with research. So we start every project with research, really getting to know the client, really kind of eliminating any biases and learning as much as we can about the client through interviews with stakeholders and workshops. We do competitive audits to understand what the market is like in that industry, and really kind of determine some key challenges and opportunities. And from there, we connect any core business needs or problems that the client is trying to solve with a visual strategy by providing some frameworks that ultimately end up guiding design in how it should really make people feel. And then design phase, there's 2 steps. First, we begin with exploration, looking at many different solutions that we can dive in to tackle the same problem while still touching on the same strategy that we laid out the phase before. And based on feedback from the client, then we really delve in and develop one chosen direction and test it on some key assets to make sure that it's going to work for them and meet their needs, depending on the client's, considering the design team they might have in-house and all the needs that they might have there. And then finally, we have our implementation phase, which is really where we make it all real. We start making stuff, depending on the type of client and the project, we'll choose to, with the client, different touch points that we'll expend upon, whether it's working on the website or social assets or our merchandise and all of that. So really this process is customized to fit each client's needs, because all of them are different industries, different problems that they're trying to solve. So it's not a cookie cutter process, but having these 4 steps really helps to really focus in on what's important, and leads us to kind of to develop really meaningful brand identities that are really based on that research and strategy that we develop from the very start. So we actually went through this process for ourselves not too long ago. We rebranded ourselves and launched our new brand just last year. And so we kind of opened in 2010 as the Original Champions of Design, or OCD for short. And this was really intended to be kind of a cheeky way to signal the rigor and meticulousness with which we do our work. That's really how we work, how we approach our work. But by 2019, we recognize that there could be, there's a bit of lack of sensitivity in the use of that acronym, and we wanted to be really mindful of that and decided to go ahead and make a change. So with the help of a naming agency, 100 Monkeys, we explored all sorts of possibilities, and that led us ultimately to rename as Champions Design. So we really started the process with this new name as our starting point. And with that, we had this objective now then to create a new visual identity system to match with this new name and represent who we are now and why we exist, and differentiate us from our competitors, as well as think about the definition of champion as someone who fights for a cause or on behalf of someone else. Because we do tend to work with clients who have shared values, who we really believe in, and who we want to champion and to be successful. So that was really the lens that we wanted to look at that with. So we went through that 4-step process, like I said. So we began with research, looking at all of our communications, kind of auditing our own brand, looking at how we were speaking about ourselves on social media and online, how we talked about our process. Also looking at the visuals that we had, how we were communicating visually through our website, social, and our word mark. And we looked at the competitive landscape and looking for trends and see how we could stand out in the field, noting here there was a lot of black and white sans serif identities. From there, we moved on to our strategy phase, and we ran a lot of workshops that we would normally run with our clients. But we just did it for ourselves, took some time for introspection there, and really think about how we needed to communicate our unique point of view with this new brand. So some workshops to try to define, what we do, how we do it, what is unique about our approach, and why we do it. What value is it that we're trying to provide? And so we developed, our offering, the kind of narrowing down to brand strategy and visual identity systems, which has been what we do at the core from the start, and thinking about our reason for being as wanting to make things better tomorrow than they are today, and doing that for our clients. And who we're doing it for, really considering, CMOs and CEOs of brands and industries that have a lot to lose. We work a lot with heritage brands and clients like that have a weight and meaning that we take very seriously. And of course, designers and design students like you who want to make a difference in the world, who have a similar values and work ethic that we do. We also did a brand character workshop to determine the brand's personality. And so we thought about what our personality was in the past and the present and the future to really kind of narrow down the key essence of our brand. And what it really boiled down to is that we're very rigorous, we're very thorough, exhaustive, and accurate in how we approach all of our projects. We're creative, imaginative, and confident. And then from there, we developed this into our design drivers, which are really visual words that help us to determine the look of our designs. So from rigorous, that came to life through meticulous attention to detail. From creative, that came to life through provocative, something that causes a strong reaction. And confident shows up as bold, so risky, courageous, and vivid in appearance. And then once we have these design driver words, we start doing visual research to support that and get on the same page about what we mean by each of these words here. So meticulous, came through in some like grid work, the way that some annotations come about, really thinking about precision. In Greek, they pass. For provocative, we have some examples of things that are a little kind of distorted or overlapping with some dramatic skill shifts. For bold, we have some large scale, some condensed type, some bold messaging as well. And then, of course, still thinking about the word champions and the associations with that, the visual vocabulary around a champion or winner, and associations like Olympic medals, heroic figures, or different social movements. And so the result of the strategy phase is really this kind of framework or creative brief that became here, in this case, our guide to design the new Champions Design brand. And we do this framework with all of our clients, and it varies depending on client needs as well, as I said. So for design, again, we start with exploration. And in this particular case, we began by looking at our icon or social avatar, exploring some of that visual vocabulary of champions or winning. And we tested it on our favicon, testing different things. Here we're exploring the concept of laurels or shields or different things like that to signify champions. And in the end, really landed on the idea of a laurel as a symbol of triumph and integrity, and had fun building it out of C's here, kind of connecting it to our name. And from there, we started building out the whole system. So we're really about building whole identity systems. A brand is not just a logo, after all, right? So we have things like the mark, the word mark, typeface, color, image selection, and we explored different directions that this could possibly take, and continued refining on that based on feedback from Bobby and Jennifer. And finally, we kind of the linchpin that kind of brought it all together was the final selection of our typeface, which was designed by this gentleman, Stefan Elbaz, whose typefaces we had worked with previously in some projects like the MLK issue of the Atlantic and TypeCon here. So our typeface is Pilat, and Pilat condensed is what makes up our word mark. And then thinking about color, what the color should be for the system. Of course, we thought about, the precious metals of metals, but we thought, well, that's not really us. We're not really so focused on winning necessarily. It's about championing others. So what about blue ribbons? Sure, that has some connotations with winning as well, but it's really about quality, which is something that we're very much dedicated to. And we were excited about blue because it kind of has meaning to us as well in terms of how it shows up on our building, on the doors and fire escapes on the facade of our East Village storefront office. So it had some emotional meaning to us there as well. So we went on with the blue, black and white as our color palette, and adding to that this pop of orange to really bring in that level of provocation and boldness that we wanted. And then here bringing that blue into our laurel icon as well. And from there, we move on to implementation, starting to make things to bring this into the world. For all of our projects, we create a cheat sheet, as we call it, which started really with the Girl Scouts of America project 10 years ago, which is really kind of a at a glance sort of poster size cheat sheet of everything that you need to know about the brand. And you included a lot of our strategic thinking here as well. We started a quarterly newsletter, prominently displaying our laurel, talking about the projects that we do. And we did a full update of our website as well, where we share lots of case studies and feature work. So we wrapped this all up in March 2020 to celebrate our 10-year anniversary. And we were really excited to have this big celebratory party, invited the staff and freelancers that could, and collaborators that had worked with us throughout the years. And we got together to celebrate. But you know, we know what happened March 2020. We kind of joke that that we had the last party in New York City. But we had it was a really good moment to kind of acknowledge all of the work that led us to where we are now. But you know, something that we really continue to hold close from our strategies is these principles that we determined throughout our process, and thinking about how we do things, how we stand for something. We work with clients that we believe in, we challenge biases, we earn trust, we work really closely with our clients from the start of the process. And we empower others and over deliver. And this was something that really kind of helped to focus us and push us along as we started working from home and dealing with the challenges of the pandemic, and continued to thrive as we did that. So that's all about champions. And now I can hand it over to Mike to show some work samples.
Great. So thank you, Karina. The Champions Project is a good example of just a sort of step-by-step walkthrough of how we execute any of the work that we do. Any of the big identity jobs always fall into those kind of 4 steps. But of course, we're very much kind of concerned with making the sort of end result feel fully unique and very tailored to the client. And oftentimes that client is an organization or group that's been around for quite a while. And the first project that we'll go through here is with the NBA. So if you want to advance slide, in starting this project, obviously a very kind of dream project for us. What we were tasked with was, first of all, in the audit of our research, going through every property and sub-brand that was linked under the National Basketball Association sort of banner, and deciding, okay, how do we kind of create one master structure that can really respond to today's kind of communication setting and really embody those best attributes of the NBA and why we love it so much. And what we found was, in coming down to the kind of central part of that system, it was really about bringing in a level of athleticism and kind of boldness to the strength of their logo. So we worked with a typographer, a type foundry in New York, Commercial Type, I'm sure you're all familiar, Christian Schwartz, in creating a kind of a bespoke version of a condensed typeface that they have called Action. And it was with this typographic sort of framework that we were able to take the logo man here on the left and have him be very much front and center of the entire kind of brand identity for the NBA. So it was the first time in 48 years that the NBA logo had ever been updated. So going on then, looking at how how this kind of typographic system really would start to do a lot of the legwork for the NBA at all events and all digital. We came up with this kind of treatment where we have specific weights within action that can be used for specific tonalities. So things that are a little bit more kind of official, serious, institutional, like a business card or letterhead, perhaps those take a lighter, more conservative weight. But we also have the ability to dial up the boldness within the typeface itself, and also having the kind of movement in the italic weight to start to dial into that sort of athletic kind of energy and that boldness that the NBA has. So you kind of start to see how these pieces start to come together. One of the applications and implementation that we were excited to do was roll out these business cards, which of course is the logo itself, updated with Action NBA, but very much that lozenge logo being that kind of core sort of signifier for the NBA. And on from there, seeing how the first of those that we were able to design was for Adam Silver, the commissioner. Looking now, we get to sort of see how the system of logos within the brand structure started to get updated. We would sort of vary uses of italicization, title case, stacking, but really, if you compare it to that first audit page that we had of the hundreds of properties, this was really a case for just bringing everything under this one structured family. And having illustration at our disposal here, you can sort of see in NBA cares. So going on from there, we can kind of see how motion and that warmth and that sort of really craft and meticulous nature that we try to approach each of our projects, we're able to sort of really knead into that. But in thinking about this being a brand that is very much a global one, and looking to kind of empower those groups all around the globe, we very much had to make sure we are sort of making this a multilingual system also. So it created a lot of unique challenges that I had never been a part of creating a design system for. But again, it was really about creating that kind of global setting. And then obviously seeing that roll out at events and sort of on merchandise of NBA stars was really gratifying. But really the sort of main takeaway there was taking a kind of historic institution and figuring out what ways to sort of bring it into a modern setting. So the next project we'll look at is Ad Age, which is an advertising magazine, a publication, a trade publication that's been around for about 92 years. And what myself and our partner Jennifer did was we flew to Detroit and went to Crane Communications archives, where they had every single issue of this very historic advertising magazine available to us. And we just rolled up our sleeves and got really sort of into visual research. We found every instance of the masthead, when I advance, that we have here on the left. From there, we also saw every instance of a heading that has been set throughout the decades and decades of the magazine. And we looked at how, moments of their history and specific language kind of could have been something that we could pull into the present day, like this tagline of important to important people, which sort of at the time had its own sort of meaning, but in what we sort of saw in it became a really good sort of battle cry for how we could reposition Ad Age going forward. And then really thinking about how they've been visualizing data for so many years, how can those kind of aspects be something that we very much put front and center for the current brand. And finally, what we saw in so many, particularly in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s issues, were just these like bold uses of graphic design in the printed advertising pages. So really taking those examples as kind of a visual meter for how we could develop something that was in at once contemporary, visually arresting, but also very much sort of nurtured the history of this industry, of this institution. And so from here, we get to see sort of some of the other pieces in our history. We're looking at now the first issue that was ever created for Advertising Age. And we just fell in love with the masthead that's in use here, set in Advertising Age. What we kind of loved was the fact that it sort of straddled the boundary of contemporary, but had this these kind of nuances in the double story G, and saw that there was so much character in that first masthead that it would be a great way to sort of pull on. And as well, the language from important to important people was just something that had almost like a wink to it in, you know, this being a magazine for those in visual culture, that there being a kind of a sense of confidence and a kind of irreverence to that. So we get to sort of see the sort of development of our logos to what Ad Age finally that in 2017, which is a kind of abbreviated version of their full title, Ad Age, and very much pulling on the kind of the style and the design of that first masthead in the issue. So we have our kind of like core piece to the system, and it's from there that we really start to do a lot of that sort of implementation and have strategy lead us towards creating a toolkit that we set up to hand off to the Ad Age communications team. So in this brand book, we developed all of those kinds of parameters. Some of the things that went into it was really looking at the bold use of color and the bold use of banding as a means of creating a sort of a identifiable sort of cover structure that would be recognizable to an audience over time, using sort of a bold, condensed version of typeface by Tobias Frere-Jones that would allow them to very quickly and easily sort of create artwork for covers, for social posts, for newsletters, that sort of had that punch and that sort of sense of optimism without having to do all that much design. Seeing our business cards here where we are sort of showing off the set of colors within it. So you can sort of see how the covers start to work, where we have these modules that take different headlines from the articles within the issue. We kind of put one story front and center. It gets its own kind of hero image. You can do multiples up to 5 stories on a cover, or you can just do one. But really, we created this one structure that sort of is a sort of easily kind of repeated one that their design team can get every week without having to really kind of labor over the kind of minutiae of the cover. But as well, it's kind of repeating the sort of core brand components that make Ad Age a recognizable publication to begin with. And so looking on from there, we get to just sort of see, we spent a lot of the first weeks of the rollout of the magazine actually in the sort of the Ad Age offices, overseeing the design of all of the interior spreads, and really just trying to hash out some of the specifics about how, you know, line lengths and figuring out various different sort of particulars in setting out the editorial part of the process. Part of it as well was taking those same sort of bold, punchy devices that we sort of had on the cover of the magazine and bringing it into a framework that created an easily kind of recognizable, easy to use for the design team, and just overall celebratory kind of communication framework for the brand. You can see them here in the newsletters. Having it on a tote, we were able to also provide the kind of flexibility within the use of the logo, where we also use this stacked word mark, like you see here. And a sort of one thing that we do for a lot of our clients, in addition to the book that we started this particular case study on, is a cheat sheet. So this is sort of all of the tools within their identity toolkit, really pared down to the sort of the main components that you can have on the wall of the communications department you're in, as a designer who maybe just joined the Ad Age team, and you can very kind of quickly become accustomed to what the rules are, what the components are, what the sort of spirit of creating work for this brand should be. And so we call it a cheat sheet, and it's something that we very much sort of find is a really useful asset in sort of putting a brand out into the world for other people to use. Our next project we're going to look at is New York Times Magazine. So again, another incredibly sort of historied institution. This one was really a case of the first major redesign that had been done in decades for the magazine. And in doing that, their new editor had decided that they would be putting a kind of a special focus on bringing in the sort of digital side to New York Times Magazine and really having that be a very important part of it. So in trying to figure out the specific role that we were to play in this, which was to create a kind of modern mark for New York Times Magazine, we of course went back and just looked through the history of this logo that really has just been around for as long as the magazine has. So it was really a case of pulling what we could in the striking of a balance from history to something that works beautifully as a favicon, something that works beautifully in multiple digital settings, but still has that history and that slickness. So here's where we net out. We very much we drafted multiple versions of this particular word mark. And then we were excited about the fact that in its final iteration, the New York Times have Matthew Carter as their sort of on-hand typographic expert. He was able to then sort of do his last few finishing touches to what is the kind of NYT Mag kind of web icon for the publication. So what we see here is that same kind of flexibility, given that we are able to sort of have maybe NYT Mag work horizontally in a nav, but maybe we use it stacked in a podcast cover or something like that. So seeing how those start to work together, we were able to create a very simple system that really sort of has that sort of historic mark that's in a contemporary setting at the core. You start to see how it sort of goes into the fold of the rebrand and redesign that the magazine had recently undergone. And then the final project we'll show before we open it up to questions and are happy to chat is for Rice Architecture. Now this was a project where we were not pulling or redesigning a current mark, but instead really devising something new and thinking about the kind of creative brief and the strategic framework that Karina had brought us through earlier. We sort of pared down their brand character to being optimistic, discerning, collaborative, and smart. And so we thought, how would that sort of start to come together in a logo? One of the things that they often spoke about was how Rice School of Architecture was the meeting point between practice and theory, but also the meeting point between Rice University and architecture at large. And so that really stuck in how we devised this mark, which is a sort of redrawn composite of an uppercase R and an uppercase A together. And we used this mark and a kind of, again, another set of specific graphic devices in their identity toolkit to sort of start to think of that idea of centrality. So in these pieces where we have maybe a tote or buttons or pins, we have the logo and that specific joining point of the A and the R at the center of the logo being dead center in each application, be that a pin or what have you. From there, we took on a sort of something that we were really interested in the research phase was how students and faculty would meet in small groups, and they would be like these circular forms of very intimate conversations between students and faculty. And so the idea of circularity and that speaking to collaboration was something that we really wanted to sort of knead into the system that we provided. So what we were able to do was create this circular grid instead of information that would hang on an X and Y axis. Instead, this our type and image and frames and stuff would start to operate on a kind of a central circular grid. And this is some of the kind of diagrams that we had for those setups. Moving on from there, we have just a brief explanation of how that can begin to work. You sort of pick specific points on the circular grid itself, and then the sort of, you can hang imagery, animation, all of that sort of stuff. And going on from that, we had this use of that circular grid, bold typography, a kind of clarity and a sobriety in how we use color, and having that sort of modernity that the school sort of often sort of played out in a lot of the student work. We had these colors that would work for each season. So for one lecture series, we would have blue. For the next lecture series, we would have orange, and really using the components of the typeface, we gave them the logo and this kind of bold use of color and circular grid to sort of create those components. And I think finally then looking at how it all starts to shape up on a tote bag. So moving on from there, we then developed a kind of a second sub-brand for Rice Architecture called Rice Design Alliance. And what we sort of did, it was kind of unique for our process, was to sort of remix the elements of the identity we had just created for a new group called Rice Design Alliance, where Rice Architecture was the School of Architecture within Rice University in Houston. Rice Design Alliance was a kind of body there for all of Houston interested in architecture and design. So it was more about outreach beyond the confines of the school. So in doing that, what we delivered to them was the kind of the same color palette and a logo that was based off of that initial icon, but that sort of used the sort of visual metaphor of connection and network by having 3 colors instead of 1 on any one piece, sort of coming together at the center of a point. So if we move on to the next slide, we can sort of see an example of the gala materials that we had developed for them in their launch of the rebrand, where for the RDA side of things, instead of choosing 1 color for a program, you choose 3 colors, and you're able to vary them in these different ways to kind of heighten that sense of kind of collaboration. Again, just taking the typeface, this one Neuhaus Gore-Tex that we had given them, and dialing up the scale, dialing up the boldness, so that they had that personality and optimism within the color palette. And then as well, of course, seeing how that system plays to a tote bag, which is a common deliverable for us. So we spend a lot of time in figuring out which is the right tote bag. So there we have the end of the Rice Architecture project. I'm happy to open it up to questions. Thanks for listening.
I'll stop my screen share here. So
cool. That was, I love seeing your work. I love hearing you explain it. You know, I think sometimes seeing it when you see work, it's like, oh, this is really, really attractive. But hearing you go through the process just like adds that extra layer of kind of like intention and stuff. So I really appreciated that. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
I had a quick question. What's generally like the timeline for these projects? How long do you spend working with these clients?
Yeah, it can really vary. Karina, maybe you could speak to that. The one thing I'd say is certain projects like the NBA can sort of be, because of the scale of them and the kind of stakeholder input that's required to find final approval on any one major change, that can just be a very long iterative process. So it can be sort of up to a year, even beyond sometimes. And then for other projects, maybe like the Rice Architecture one, we would sort of define based off of the scope of what the budget of the project was, what the needs were, how much man hours we need to throw at it, and sort of develop from there. But it does sort of vary pretty dramatically between anything up to a couple of weeks we've sort of done in recent times, or things that sort of flesh out a lot longer than that. There's a project that myself and Karina are gleefully anticipating the launch of at the middle of this year, which has been in the works for about 2 years now. So it'll be a nice thing when it's actually out in the world and we can talk about it and show it and things like that. But so, you know, certain projects really do take a minute.
Yeah, geez, 2 years.
2 years, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of course, the last year had its own unique challenges and delays. So
Yeah, sure.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. What? Any other questions?
I have one. What is one of your favorite projects that you've worked on recently?
Well, I feel like we both are excited about the one that we can't talk about yet, but gosh, yeah, there's been a lot of really exciting things. We worked on the Cory Booker campaign together, Mike and I, and that was a really fun process. It was one of the speedier timelines due to, of course, the expedient timeline of a campaign, but that was really great to you know, build a strategy that helped to communicate what the candidate believed in and stood for, and then extrapolate that into a really exciting system that could be applied quickly and efficiently to all sorts of applications by the campaign design staff that had to respond really fast to you know, as fast as a news cycle. So it was an exciting project to be a part of.
Yeah, that was also, it was really unique to sort of have to implement a system so quickly that then got rolled out at such scale. So you'd see a placard that we had just created, and then in photos on the Cory Booker campaign Flickr account, it was like just visible in its thousands across the sort of a sea of people at an event somewhere in the US. So that was just a kind of a really, you know, a kind of gratifying thing to sort of see. And an ongoing part of it. But I think the people that we worked with for that project also made it, we really sort of found, I think any kind of campaign work, you're really in the trenches. And so anything that we could do to try to make their communication sort of goals anyway more achievable, we were kind of happy to do. And you sort of really commit to it in that way. And the hours are long and you sort of do your best. But there's you know, anything to topple the incumbent during that campaign was really the main thing. So we were all very motivated in doing that.
Something came in through the chat, Mike, for you.
Oh yeah. So could you speak to the experience with your internship? Do you have any recommendations or thoughts? Yeah. So yeah, I think the internship that I had started with Bobby and Jennifer, I had kind of rolling back a little before then, I had sort of finished my BA in graphic design in Dublin about a year prior. And what I had done off the back of that was just to do maybe 3 or 4 internships, about 3 months long each, in various places in Dublin, to just really try to meet as many people, form as much of just a basic understanding of like industry work. Because although I was so excited about about design and the work that I hoped to do coming out of college, I was still, you know, as we all are, kind of quite green, and none of the projects in my portfolio were real projects. They were all sort of spec, sort of college treatments. So I spent that first year really sort of just doing any of these kind of jobs and internships in places that would have me, that would allow me to really just get a good understanding of what it sort of took and what was involved in kind of creating good work. And then as soon as I was able, I moved over to the US and started throwing out applications to a lot of places, similarly in New York. So had a lot of meetings, and I found OCD, as we were called then, on a kind of profile website called Image of the Studio, which was in 2013. They had taken every, I think maybe the top 100 or maybe less, all the design agencies or branding agencies in New York, and just sort of did a profile of them, sort of what their strengths were, what their kind of capacity for different kind of types of design were. Was it more motion? Was it branding? Was there just kind of just publication design and identity for museums? You know, breaking it down in all these categories. And I found Bobby and Jennifer's work on that, and they had Girl Scouts of America, and they also had WNBA, but everything had a very typographic bent, which I think I was very excited about. They were doing big commercial brand work, but they were paying the same. They were doing it through very expressive typography. They weren't sort of, there wasn't just a sans serif typeface with a logo near it. It was like system driven, and I was acutely aware that I knew so little about actual brand identity development, and that these guys knew like so much more than me. So starting my internship there, I really just was very much eager to please. Anything I could do to sort of demonstrate that I was trying to learn, I was sort of eager to sort of take what was being taught. And it's essentially been, you know, year after year, developing more of an understanding of, you know, the world of identity development and all that entails. Like we talk about the process, because, you know, there are very much things that you need to hit, and you need to be able to demonstrate to the client that the value that they're getting from the work that we do is there, and it's not just something that designers make up for cash. And so to do that, we very much sort of we ask ourselves and challenge ourselves on the theories that we kind of put out here. And so, yeah, it's been, that's what the internship did for me. It was, any advice I'd give to any of you guys that are looking for internships, it's really be eager to please. You're there to learn. You're there to be as useful as possible, but really develop as much as you can, and say yes more than you say no in those first moments, because I think it kind of, the more experience you can amass can sort of allow you to you know, develop and understand a little more. Full ramble mode there. You have, what would you take anyone on for a remote internship? The remote internship, it's been and I don't know totally how other agencies, obviously we're a small one, how they would have done it throughout the last year. It is a little tricky. I think remote internships, it's not something I think we've categorically ruled out at all. So we're still, of course, you know, taking portfolios and considering those things, but keeping everyone abreast of sort of what's going on in the studio within the team, and having everybody really sort of clued in, able to collaborate, and useful to a process where we have specific, you know, calendar deadlines to hit for different projects. Oftentimes, I think not being in the room with each other means that the internships can be a little tricky, but you know, I think the reality is, and the hope is, that, you know, we won't be remote forever, and it's certainly looking more and more positive each day. So we're not certainly not ruling out that idea. I think, Karina, would you say, you know, the fact that it has become 100% remote is kind of a revelation, which has had its own good and bad parts. You know, our process has certainly changed, hasn't it? In that way?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we did have an intern with us when in the spring of last year, when we did start working remotely. So that did kind of shift that relationship a little bit, and she had to work remotely for a little while. But yeah, over the last year, we've definitely honed our capabilities in terms of collaborating remotely really well, and really kind of made that a you know, big part of our skill set. In terms of like the timing of internships that we do, we don't have like set seasons for internships or anything like that. So it really depends on what we have going on in the studio, and we need an extra set of hands. So like Mike said, it doesn't hurt to share work with us and see what the possibilities are.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. With the growth of social media, when you guys are designing, do you feel like it heavily influences the way you design as compared to like a lot of the traditional design work?
I don't think I'd say that. I think oftentimes the sort of medium that people are kind of taking in information can sort of develop over time. But a lot of the principles that make for effective communication design actually stay, they're kind of timeless to a degree. So the way we implement work will often have maybe a sort of print communications arm to it, and there'll also be a social side of it. And for something like the Cory Booker campaign, it was so predominantly social driven. But the kind of the things we ask ourselves and the communication aims that we sort of tie onto uh, the sort of social campaigns or the how different promotion works over Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. A lot of the time, it's coming from the same place as the more conventional or like historical forms of design. So we really sort of believe in that we don't really narrow our sort of the platforms we work on too much. We sort of believe that with a sort of enough of a kind of enough focus in the right areas, you can sort of create effective work, be it in print or digital. But yeah, it's certainly a thing that's developing quickly, more and more. But yeah, we keep it broad.
Any other questions out there?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah.
So you briefly mentioned freelancers that you work with. What's the process with that, and what makes you reach out to them? And what do you look for in a freelancer?
Yeah, we work with multiple freelancers, depending on the sort of capacity we have in the studio at any one time. But I think the any sort of best introduction is to sort of send your work and make sure you're putting your best foot forward in the work that you have. Oftentimes what we look for in freelancers are things that are not within the sort of general wheelhouse of the designers or otherwise in the studio. So it would be people who very much have a kind of expertise in motion, or we work with illustrators for specific jobs. So those would be the kind of areas that we're sort of going for more in terms of bringing on freelancers.
Any other questions out there? I had one.
Yeah.
It's not, I appreciate the questions everybody's asking because it's very kind of student centric. So I think that's is a great opportunity to kind of get that perspective. This question is more about, so when you developed your own personal identity, it looked like you sort of started with like the smallest sort of way that you would develop it through like a favicon and a social media avatar. Do you find that that's largely how you develop your identities nowadays, is you kind of start with like the smallest existence of it and then you kind of make sure that it can scale up?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a scalability is certainly something we keep very much front of mind. The kind of little bit of an advantage we had with the Champions rebrand was that Karina and I's client were also kind of designers who had a very kind of strict sense of what they thought they wanted, which was able to kind of steer early parts of the process pretty efficiently. So yeah, I think for that project, knowing that we wanted to as much as we could create one simple symbol simple enough to scale at any size, including favicon, that over time the kind of connection to it would start to replace the need for us to use the word mark. So that was kind of, we thought like the power in the use of a symbol instead of even the word would be where we want to end up. But of course, the kind of the relationship to that mark is only sort of created year after year. So it's kind of, I think, a long road ahead for that mark to gain that reputation. But that's certainly the kind of forecast for it, or the kind of the aim for it. But yeah, scalability was a big one for sure.
All right, I have another question.
Great.
Yeah.
Anybody else has any other? This might be the last one. So if anybody has any last questions, definitely reach out or express that. I was curious because that's what drew me to your work, is how you definitely have like, I would say, kind of a design for good, socially minded kind of perspective. When you take on clients, how do you, and it sounded like, you try to align your values with their, you kind of make sure that your values and their values are aligned. Are you able to kind of assess that? Do you guys have a process for that? Have there been circumstances also where a client will come to you and you don't necessarily feel comfortable providing graphics for them? So you might say, we're just maybe not the right company for you.
That's a good question. We like to say that we don't work with assholes. So it's like a cheeky internal saying that we have. But I think that because of the work that we have out in the world, we tend to attract certain types of clients, whether socially minded, like social justice focused, or culturally focused clients that we get really excited about. So I think that's part of it, that we just kind of, by having what we have out there, we attract certain things. But like there may be a point in time where maybe we don't respond to an RFP if it's something that is not something that holds to our values. But.
Yeah, and I think that there has been more probably work within the political sphere in recent years, but I think there's a firm kind of attitude towards keeping a varied sort of client profile year to year. It's not, I don't think the belief of the studio is to sort of really become a sort of, the agency for political branding and nothing beyond that. Of course, that is one very, that's a strand that's really important to us. But the kind of, at least speaking personally, obviously I can't speak for Bobby and Jennifer. I think that sense of kind of subverting your own expectation year after year by going after identities or different projects within different fields where the collaboration with the client is a kind of core part of that is what we're after. So as long as there isn't a real conflicting belief systems there, like then I think we're sort of open to those. But I think every studio and agency there's probably a steering towards a client base that share their beliefs and share their kind of expectations about things, and probably there's a magnetism that happens there. I'd suggest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like kind of a synergy.
Right.
Attract it. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Well, this meeting was scheduled for an hour, which we've arrived at. So I wanted to thank everybody who attended, and thank everybody for their questions. I really appreciate Mike and Karina for your time. It was really great to hear you all talk about your work and go a little bit more in depth in the thinking that occurs behind it. And I love the work that you all do. You know, when I saw it, I was just like, whoa, these guys are great. So, yeah, keep it up. And yeah, I thank you all. And we'll be holding our final studio visit next week. So for those of you who are available, please attend. And yeah, have a good afternoon, and I'll be in touch with everybody.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
appreciate it. Okay, take care.
Yeah.